Hello. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, and this is Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12 is the beginning of the ancestral narrative of Abram and Sarai, who will later become Abraham and Sarah. And the story begins where the Lord, so we know whose voice that is, it's the Yahwist. The Lord said to Abram, leave everything you know and travel into this land that I will show you. So he leaves everything that is known to him. He agrees, he does it. Takes his wife, his nephew, and some other folks that he gathers along, and they go to the land of Canaan. And they visit a couple cities or sites in the land of Canaan. And there's just a little mention in there, just a small little mention of that was still the time that the Canaanites lived there. Now, if you go back in time a couple chapters, you remember that justification for the curse of Ham being placed on his son Canaan. And that is a justification for kicking the Canaanites out of their land. And that's what happened. So, they just mentioned that they were there. They were still there because they are visiting different sites. They're on basically a tour of the land of Canaan. And their tour is interrupted by a great famine. And so they go to Egypt. Sound familiar? Everybody's going to Egypt all the time in the Bible. So Abraham and Sarai and Lot go into Egypt. And before they get to Egypt, knowing that there'll be aliens and foreigners in the land of Egypt, Abraham has this great idea. He says, Sarai, you are a beautiful woman. And to prevent people from killing me to have you as their wife, we're going to say you're my sister. We're going to say you're my sister. So number one, these other guys won't kill me. And number two, I could load up on the swag. And that's what happens. The word of how beautiful Sarai is gets to Pharaoh's palace, and Pharaoh brings Sarai into his household, and he gives Abram all these gifts in exchange for the marriage to his sister. What happens is, because God is displeased with this, because Abram and Sarai are the chosen ancestors, patriarch and matriarch, what happens is God's displeased, and so plagues get visited upon the house of Pharaoh. And somehow Pharaoh figures this out. I don't know, he has some magicians or something, divination. And he says to Abram, why did you lie to me? Why did you let me think she was your sister and let me marry her and take her into my house? And then all this bad stuff happened. He says, listen, take your wife, take everything that you have, which now he's very rich with things from Pharaoh's treasury, and leave. And so apparently the famine's over because they go back to the land of Canaan and they visit Negeb and Bethel, and they go back to the very first place that Abram set an altar for God. They go back to that first place, and that's where they end up. But that's next chapter. So I was reading ahead. This is how it ends. Pharaoh says, take everything and leave. So this is the ancestral narrative, the beginning of it, because it's continuing on. It's going to continue for many more chapters. Divine promises, right? God says, if you leave everything and go into this land that I will show you, I will bless you. You will be blessed. You will be the father of a great nation. There's all these great blessings coming Abram's way if he leaves everything he knows and goes into this land that God shows him. Divine promises. Then, divine promises are threatened by human intervention. Pharaoh taking Sarai into his household and taking the matriarch away from the patriarch. We need those two together for God's plans to work out. And so, divine promises interrupted or threatened by human intervention and rescued by divine benevolence. Beneficence too, I suppose. So this is the model for what happens here. And it is sort of a miniature Exodus, right? Does that sound familiar? They're in Egypt, Pharaoh, plagues, and then Pharaoh says, just take everything and leave. I don't want these plagues anymore. So of course we're dealing with different Pharaoh, a different patriarch, but this is it's an archetype of story that you would read in ancient Near Eastern texts like this one, which is the Bible, and you would see that there is theology at work here, that God makes promises, that human beings make mistakes to thwart God's or threaten God's promises being fulfilled, and God intervenes to help uh, reverse what has happened. And so God promises to take care of us. Bad things happen, and God finds a way around, through, over, besides, anywhere. God finds one of those prepositions to help us get to the other side of the bad thing. And so it's an archetype of how these relationships work, and it is a theological claim about who God is. So take heart to that. Maybe you can apply it to your life. Where have you felt God's promises have been thwarted, either by your own actions or the actions of others? And where can you see around you or in this situation that God is acting on your behalf to go around or get, not to reverse the action, but to get around the things that have happened, to interrupt God's plans for God's promises to be fulfilled. So I think it's a good way to look at who God is and how God acts in our lives. So Genesis 12. Take care.